Don't throw us off, man. I don't know. We're watching. Thank you. This is the easy shot. Come on.
How do you get in the building?
What?
How do you get in the building?
They let anything. Yeah. So, but if there will be kind of a formal procession coming back through, that was it. One side. Andy.
That was it?
Yeah, they're gonna come back.
I thought Pelosi was walking them.
No, no, just the managers, the clerk, and the sergeant rounds.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So thank you.
So they come back to the, they can't wait for Pelosi to come around.
Yeah, that's an awful lot of cables for that.
Jesus. Good Lord. Are we expecting more? Oh, we're expecting leadership, yeah. Oh, it's always, well, yeah.
All I heard all day was that Pelosi was walking over the bridges.
Bad photographer.
That's what Photoshop is for.
Removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any person who has, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding any office under the United States, unquote. In his conduct while President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of the President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States. In that, on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate met at the United States Capitol for a joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state or federal officials. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump addressed a crowd at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There, he reiterated false claims that we won this election and we won it by a landslide. He also willfully made statements that in context encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Thus incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of Congress, the Vice President, and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. President Trump's conduct on January 6, 2021 followed his prior efforts to subvert and obstruct the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those prior efforts included a phone call on January 2nd, 2021, during which President Trump urged the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger to, quote, find enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results and threatened Secretary Raffensperger if he failed to do so. In all this, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Donald John Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security, democracy, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with governance and the rule of law. Donald John Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives. Mr. President, that completes the exhibition of the article of impeachment against Donald John Trump, President of the United States. The managers request that the Senate take order for the trial. The managers now request leave to withdraw.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin. And the Senate will duly notify the House of Representatives when it is ready to proceed with the trial. Thank you.
And there you have it, the short reading of that article of impeachment delivered to the Senate, which thus begins the trial process of this, which will take place 2 weeks from today. Not clear whether there will be witnesses called. Could Rudy Giuliani be called? Could others call? That remains to be seen, or whether they move to dispatch of this quickly and get a vote there in the Senate floor. Want to bring in CBS News legal expert Jeffrey Rosen. He is a constitutional law expert and president of the National Constitution Center. And so glad you're here, Jeffrey. Some Republicans have said that this proceeding is not constitutional. Is it?
We don't know, because it's never been tried before to try a former president. Most scholars think that it is constitutional. That was the conclusion of the Congressional Research Service. And the argument that it isn't hinges on the text. The text says that penalties in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office and disqualification to hold any office of trust or profit under the United States. And Tom Cotton and some other Republicans are saying if you can't be removed, as a former president can, you can't be impeached. Now, in 1876, the Senate did try a former Secretary of War, and that precedent has come to be viewed as the fact that it can try the president. But here's the bottom line. If the Senate decides to convict President Trump or not, the Supreme Court is unlikely to intervene, because the Supreme Court has said that impeachments are basically political questions that are up to the Senate to decide on their own. So Republican senators may be saying, you know, if you do this, then the court will step in. The overwhelming weight of the evidence, embodied in a case called the Walter Nixon case, says that the Supreme Court will be very reluctant to second-guess a decision of the Senate, regardless of which way they decide to go.
There you see the impeachment managers essentially walking back through the rotunda. This is a rare and very ceremonial walk that they're doing there as they return to the House side of the U.S. Capitol. And Jeffrey, another question. So if the Senate were to convict former President Trump, does that disqualify him from running for office in the future?
No, you have to take 2 votes according to Senate rules, not the Constitution itself. First, the Senate would have to vote by a 2/3 majority to convict, and then they would take a separate vote and would only need a simple majority to disqualify him from holding an office of trust or profit under the United States.
So is it possible then that he could escape conviction but then be voted that he could never hold office again? Could you split those?
No, you can't split. It's a great question, but the text of the Constitution says that you have to first be removed and then disqualified. So obviously, if there's 2/3 to convict, there's likely to be a majority to disqualify. Now, if he's not convicted, as we talked about last week, there is an alternative method to disqualify him from holding future office. That's a joint resolution under the 14th Amendment, but that won't be the focus of this trial. They're going to focus on convicting him and then deciding whether to disqualify.
Jeffrey Rosen, stay with us. I want to return to Major Garrett. And on that point, we've heard Mitt Romney, Republicans, suggest that this is impeachable. You've heard Marco Rubio say that this whole thing is stupid and counterproductive. But what about that very element? The idea that a political calculation. Mitch McConnell lost 2 Republican seats and lost the majority in part because of the actions of President Trump. Would there be a decision we have to cut ties with him to save the Republican Party's political future?
Well, essentially what the Senate Republicans are going to be asked to evaluate is the body of the president's rhetoric and actions after the election undercut and undermine American democracy? Did the thing he said that very morning, January 6th, we hope Vice President Pence will do something, knowing full well he could not do anything? Were those words by themselves, whether they were an incitement to violence or not? This article says they undermined democracy because they said something manifestly untrue about the powers of the vice president, leading people who then stormed the Capitol, committed wanton criminal acts, to believe something that could happen that couldn't happen. Simply could not happen. Vice President Pence did not have the powers President Trump said he did. And does that very act of saying something so false, with whether it's malicious intent or not, undermine democracy? Does it undermine the Constitution? Does it disqualify you from seeking federal office? That's the essential question. Now, Republicans want to make procedural arguments. Is it constitutional? Is it not? Will there be witnesses? The central question is this. Did the president uphold the Constitution as he swore to on the day he was inaugurated, or did his words and actions seek to undermine it? That's it.
And that's the trial that these impeachment managers are going to put forth their strongest arguments.
So unusual is every single person in that Senate chamber, as a senator or a member of the House, as an impeachment manager, is an eyewitness to what happened. They are eyewitnesses. Some might even call them traumatized victims of that insurrection. They lived through it. They have living memories. They're not reading through anything. They're not trying to discern what the president's intent was on a transcript of a call to the Ukrainian president, impeachment of last year. They all lived through this. What is the sum total of their legal, political, and personal reaction to that truth?
Trump will have representation at this trial, right?
Yes, he will. And most of the arguments so far that we have heard is that this is not constitutional and that there should be some way to look at the president's rhetoric and ask the simple question, did this rhetoric incite people to commit violent acts, or did they commit violent acts entirely by themselves? That will be the president's argument. He's certainly entitled to it. But as this article just said, it's the body of things the president said. And did those words uphold the Constitution or try to pull it down into some unrecognizable muck?
Right. And as we know now, former President Trump will not have the large group of lawyers that represented him in the previous impeachment trial, some of whom were White House counsels as well. I want to bring back in CBS's Chris Van Cleve. And Chris, people want to know, okay, what happens next? We know the trial doesn't start until 2 weeks from now, but lay it out for us.
Sure, this is going to happen in slow motion now. You will have tomorrow, both Senator Leahy will essentially be sworn in as the judge, and all 100 senators will be sworn in as impeachment jurors. Then the Senate will issue its formal summons to President Trump. That then kicks off about 2 weeks of pretrial work where the president's team will mount their response to the impeachment article, and then impeachment managers will have time to respond. That then allows the trial to start the week of February 8th. And all of this is going on at a time of heightened security around the Capitol. You know, the Capitol is now surrounded by a 7-foot unscalable wall and thousands of National Guard troops. 5,000 of those National Guard troops will be kept on duty here in Washington through March because law enforcement, we have learned here at CBS News, is seeing an uptick in online chatter that is making some concerning threats towards lawmakers potentially trying to target them leaving or arriving at the Capitol. And a lot of this is stemming from the ongoing impeachment. So not only do you have the pressure many Republicans are feeling from their own party, but you have an uptick in threatening chatter about the impeachment process in general. Nora?
Right. The threat context still very real, as Chris Van Cleve points out, and why there is still an enormous security presence surrounding the United States Capitol and will be for quite some time. Let's bring in CBS's Nancy Cordes. She is at the White House. And yet, Nancy, all of this, of course, an impeachment trial dominating the first couple of weeks of the Biden administration. Do they believe there at the White House that complicates their very ambitious agenda?
Well, they are relieved, Nora, that there's going to be this 2-week break so that President Biden's cabinet members can go through the confirmation process. After all, most of them are either awaiting their confirmation hearings or awaiting a confirmation vote. And he would very much like to have his cabinet on board. We just saw Janet Yellen, his Treasury Secretary, confirmed tonight. He's hoping that his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, will be confirmed tomorrow. The White House doesn't see much of a strategic advantage to wading into all of this, however, and talking a lot about the timing and the length of the trial. They say that that is a matter for the Senate to decide. They're hoping that the Senate can do its work even as it conducts this Senate trial. There was even some talk that bubbled up today about whether Vice President Kamala Harris should actually be presiding over this trial because she is technically, as Vice President, the presiding officer of the Senate. And the White House quickly batted that down, said, no, Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont will do just fine. They don't believe that this is an appropriate role for the vice president. So they're really trying to keep this trial at arm's length and to say that this is something that is for Congress to decide, for Congress to work out the timing. They're hard at work on their own agenda.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. And, you know, when we think about all of this, the U.S. Capitol, which was the scene of the crime, the president impeached on the very House floor where many of the rioters tried to get in. They actually made it onto the Senate floor, which we just saw, where they actually presented and transmitted this article of impeachment. And as you pointed out, many of these lawmakers witness to what actually happened as there was the destruction of the U.S. Capitol. And on that note, about the question of law and order, what's happening, the investigation, the prosecution, let's bring in CBS's Catherine Herridge, because she's been following every detail of this investigation into the January 6th riot. And Catherine, bring us up to date. How many people have been arrested or charged by the FBI and law enforcement?
Nora, tonight a law enforcement official tells CBS News that more than 150 individuals now face federal charges for the riots, and they come from across the country, from California to Ohio, Tennessee, and Virginia, among other states. The official said the sedition task force here in Washington, led by the acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin, is drilling down on the officer assault cases. CBS News has learned that hundreds of hours of body cam video has now been reviewed, generating new leads and evidence against the assailants. And the task force is bearing down on the broader conspiracy cases that go to significant premeditation and coordination in advance of the January 6th rally and breach of the Capitol. The first conspiracy case was brought last week against 3 alleged members of the Oath Keepers, described by the FBI in court documents as a large but loosely organized collection of militia who believe the federal government is systematically stripping their constitutional rights. CBS News is told this case is the template for more conspiracy prosecutions that are expected in the weeks ahead, Nora.
Really interesting details there on the investigation, Catherine. And let me ask you about this. We've now heard from some of those rioters who were engaged in this mob that they believe they were there at the invitation of President Trump. Explain that.
Well, what they say in their interviews, or specifically in their social media, which in many respects, Nora, has indicted their own actions, they say that they felt that they were invited, especially these tweets from the president saying it's going to be wild. But what the criminal complaints also show is that these individuals, in some cases, began planning their actions and coordinating with other small groups or cells in different parts of the country, even in the days before January 6th, Nora.
There's going to be more of this, certainly, as the FBI drills down and we get more details from these prosecutions, as Catherine has so brilliantly laid out in all of this. I want to bring back in our CBS News chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. And so, Major, we just learned that there were only 3 Republican senators actually there in the Senate while they transmitted these articles. I mean, how difficult does it make it for them? They don't want to take this vote.
They don't want to take this vote, but they're not going to be able to get away from it. And they may find, as I said before, procedural arguments to say, you know, I don't think this is constitutional, so I'm not going to dignify this with my vote, and find their way out of it. The simple truth is, as I said before, this creates a very sharp question for everyone in the Senate body. Did the president's rhetoric, the 6th of January or the days leading up to it, which, as Catherine just laid out, many people who are being charged with crimes now heard and interpreted as a call to action? A lie told by the president over and over, this election is stolen, you've got to do something about it. And they did something about it. What is that nexus? How tight is that connection? Do you consider that incitement, and do you consider it supporting or undermining the Constitution? That's the question. And if you don't convict the president, then you're also getting yourself off the hook of having to make that other second vote, which is, do we prevent President Trump, Donald Trump, from ever seeking federal office? And if you're a Republican right now, you don't want to make that vote. That vote is even tougher than the conviction vote, because you can find procedural ways. We've never seen it before. I'm not sure it's constitutional. You can deal with it that way. So that's how you dispense with two votes you don't want to take. And that's where I think most Republicans, in the end, will find a way to land.
Let's go back to CBS's Nicole Killian. She is at the Capitol. And, Nicole, you look at these 9 impeachment managers. All of them have an expertise in law. What have you learned about how they're going to prosecute and present this case?
Well, that is really the next phase and what they will be working on over these next couple of days. I did have a chance to speak with Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro, one of the impeachment managers, just before he headed to the floor tonight. And, what he told me is that really is their next step. They're working on dividing up their roles, who's going to do what. He did not specify just yet what exactly he will be doing. And at this point, they're really also kind of waiting to take their cues from the Senate, which will lay out kind of the rules for how this trial will move forward. So they don't know yet exactly how long it could be, whether they can call witnesses. So far, we have not heard much objection, at least from the impeachment managers, to this election today. Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy to preside over the trial, given that he is a Democrat, but certainly many Republicans have been very vocal about objecting to that, and they feel that the optics just aren't fair.
Nicole Killian, thank you. And we mentioned Congressman Jamie Raskin, who started to write this while he was actually there on the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, he taught constitutional law at American University.
For years.
This is going to be, at least for political observers, fascinating to watch them lay out the case against the President of the United States.
Right, and do you need witnesses? Or, as some House Democrats and managers have said, we watched it all on television. What else do we need to see? What other body of evidence is there? What witnesses do we need to? We're all witnesses. Some might say, I'm a victim and a trier of fact. And here's the other thing that's complicated for some Republicans. If your name is Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley, or you signed on to this idea on January 6th of challenging the acceptance of certified electoral votes from various states. Well, if you convict President Trump, are you by implication convicting yourself for propagating or propelling something that was untrue and then had disastrous effects on the Capitol and our sense of democracy? Do you want to do that? Is that the place you want to put your political career and what you were advocating for? That's another reason that there is a net advantage for President Trump. Regardless of all the terrible things that happen, he has an advantage among Republicans who don't want to take those 2 votes.
No doubt, a vote of integrity, a vote of character, and a vote that will decide their political futures. Our coverage will continue on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN. There will be more on your local news on this CBS station, and for some of you tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. For all of us at CBS News, thank you. I'm Norah O'Donnell, CBS News, Washington.